Welcome to the Haven Collective. I'm J.R. Forasteros, and this is the Beacon Bit. Today we're talking about the fascist tool of sexual anxiety, and we are bringing it into conversation with John's vision of the Bride of the Lamb from Revelation chapter 19. Not long after his inauguration to his second term, President Trump signed an executive order titled Defending Women from Gender Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. Despite the fact that it was not based on any biological science, this was an attack not on the enemies of women per se, but specifically on transgender Americans and the institutions and people who support them. What really caught my eye about this is that it was an attack on transgender people and on anyone really who has any kind of queer positive sexual ethic, but it was all done in the name of defending women from people who were attacking them. And that's the part of the rhetoric that pinged for me, because authoritarian regimes have a long history of couching what they do in the guise of defending women. So, for instance, by far the most common justification for the lynching of black Americans throughout history was that black men were a danger to white women. The Nazis did something similar to convince German men to be anti-Jewish in the lead up to World War II. Reporting on how various Nazi newspapers used propaganda to accomplish this, Insa Kumar says this: charges of sexual promiscuity, depravity, and violence were particularly powerful ways to demonize Jews because seduction and rape raised fears of so-called racial degeneration and emasculated non-Jewish men who were unable to protect their women from alleged Jewish perversions. Counteraction was therefore urgent in order to bring an end to racial defilement and to restore Aryan men to their rightful place as symbols of masculine strength and authority. We see something similar in Rome as well. Tacitus, who was a Roman historian writing a few decades after the book of Revelation, reported that there were widespread rumors, likely begun by Nero, that Christians are incestuous. Now, again, we know that that's because Christians called everyone brother and sister, and so they would, outsiders would see a man calling his wife sister or a wife calling her husband brother, and they would say, oh, that's so weird, they're sleeping together. And then again, something that could have been easily understood or investigated became an excuse to persecute this minority group of people. That's where I find the image of the Bride of the Lamb in Revelation 19 so provocative, because what John is focusing on here is the purity of the martyrs who have remained faithful in the midst of all of this persecution. They have not allowed themselves to become legalistic and cruel, but they have also not compromised their faith in Jesus in order to conform to Rome in the name of safety or security. They have kept themselves pure, and so they are presented as a virginal bride on her wedding day. Now, what I find provocative about this, particularly for our discussion of sexual anxiety, is the inherent queerness of this metaphor. I am a cis hetero male, and yet I am called to identify most strongly in the New Testament as a bride. I am the bride. I'm part of the bride of Christ. So that for someone like me, who is a straight cisgendered man, that is a queering of myself, right? I am called to look at myself as part of this female presenting body. And that dismantles, I think, any claim that what John is interested in here in his depiction of faithfulness is some kind of heteronormative sexual ethic. That's nowhere in John's mind as he is depicting this image of the bride of the Lamb. In fact, if it were, he would have said so, because these charges of sexual promiscuity and sexual deviance were the main charges being leveled against the Christian community that were enabling this persecution to persist. And so in the face of all of that, John presents a picture of the Christian community that is faithful and that is pure, not because of their sexual ethic, but because of their commitment to Jesus in the face of an authoritarian regime. Again, Stanley points out that this movement by the Roman government was particularly tied to a patriarchal view of the world. It's one that the Nazis supported as well, and it's one that the Trump MAGA movement supports, and you can see it very clearly in the way that they articulated the executive order that claims to be a defense of women. Here's what Stanley says. Since fascist politics has at its base the traditional patriarchal family, it is characteristically accompanied by panic about deviations from it. The politics of sexual anxiety is a powerful way to present freedom and equality as fundamental threats without explicitly appearing to reject them. A robust presence of a politics of sexual anxiety is perhaps the most vivid sign of the erosion of liberal democracy. This is why I think this is so important, right? By claiming to be defending women or defending the traditional family, authoritarian movements can wage war on equality and freedom without having to explicitly say so. Because if we feel like our families are in danger, or if we buy into a patriarchal worldview where women are somehow lesser and therefore more vulnerable than men, then we will be motivated by a desire to protect and a desire to uphold that patriarchal worldview, to sacrifice our freedoms and sacrifice equality of the most vulnerable, people who are actually vulnerable, like the queer community, like Black Americans, like the Jews during World War II, in the name of protecting. It's an insidious and wicked inversion and subversion of our desire to protect the vulnerable by getting us to buy into the lie that the people who are actually the most vulnerable are some of the most privileged people in our society. This is tricky for the church because as a 2,000-year-old institution, we have a lot of traditions that we find sacred, and rightfully so. When we at Haven receive communion every week together, we're participating in a 2,000-year-old tradition that we find deep meaning in. But traditions can often mask injustices. They can often mask bigotry, and they can create harm. And what John's vision of the bride reminds us is that what we are called to be faithful to is not a particular set of traditions, not a particular way things have been, but to where we see Jesus, because he is our groom, he is our beloved, and he is the one that we are to follow. So I want to say specifically to our queer members of Haven, that there is nothing wrong with your sexuality, that God loves you, God created you the way you are, and you can be faithful exactly as you are. This image of the bride of Christ, this image of the bride of the Lamb, is one that includes you in your queerness. The same way it includes me in my cis-hetero straightness, right? And so we love that you're a part of Haven, and we commit to stand with you no matter what kind of attacks come at you. I look forward to unpacking this more in our beacons this week. Until then, grace and peace be with you.